Good morning everyone, my name is Zaen. I'm a fifth year law art student here at the ANU, and this morning I am joined by Associate Professor Dr. Phillip Drew for this week's edition of Ask an Academic. Good morning, Phil.
Hi Zaen, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
Now, we met last year, at this time last year, while undertaking your course Law and Armed Conflict.
Right, yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the courses that you teach, both here at ANU and also internationally?
Right. At ANU this year, I'm teaching Law of Armed Conflict to undergrads. That's the only undergrad course that I'll teach this year. And then at the LLM level, I'll teach international law, humanitarian law, peacekeeping operations law, and maritime security law.
Fantastic.
And sometimes overseas, I will teach international the law of armed conflict to various schools or colleges.
Now, you didn't actually start off in law, but rather the Canadian military.
Yes.
So tell me about that transition from being an intelligence officer to then a legal officer.
I was an intelligence officer in the Army for, I think, a total of about 15, 16 years. And the thing that made me change decide to make the shift or the switch from being an intelligence officer to law was Rwanda. I was in Rwanda in 1994 during the genocide, and I was sitting one evening, a particularly awful evening, with a couple of colleagues, one who was the Canadian lawyer and the other one who was the Australian lawyer, Professor Bruce Oswald. And we were talking and just, recollecting how the day was, and Bruce and Luke said to me, "Why don't you become a lawyer?" And I said, "I don't have the brains to do that." And I talked to my wife, and here I am.
Wonderful. Now, you spoke about Rwanda, and
Yes.
so you've spoken to me in class about your time in the First Gulf War.
Yes. Yeah.
How did those experiences inspire or influence your decision to become an actual academic as opposed to just a practicing lawyer?
The First Gulf War experience didn't really get my academic mind going. It was pure intelligence work from my perspective, and interesting, but not overly inspiring in the academic manner. It was Rwanda that really gave me the desire to do something different, to be able to perhaps make a difference at some point in time, teach people the laws, and get out the messages on genocide and crimes against humanity, and that these are horrible offenses, and just teach the law around those.
Really important issues.
Yeah.
Now, what do you enjoy being an academic? So what are some things that you enjoy about it?
You guys.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. The fact that I get to interact with smart people on a regular basis. Not that I didn't have smart people throughout my life, I have, but it's so much fun to exchange ideas and also to bring new ideas to the fore in a class like Armed Conflict, because many students, when they come into a class called International Humanitarian Law, think it's about delivering food and stuff, not about delivering bombs.
Yeah.
And as you work through the rules and develop that knowledge of how the law works, and you see people starting to go, "Oh, I'm getting this." It's so much fun to see that development going on from my perspective, standing in front of the class.
Brilliant. Well, I loved LOAC, so I can definitely attest to that course. Now, you have probably one of the coolest titles ever, which is being the only lawyer in the world who is a qualified expert for the Organisation of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I'm going to set something straight. I'm not an expert in chemical weapons per se. I have expertise in the law around or surrounding chemical weapons. So my role with the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, is that I am a qualified expert, meaning that I am an expert in my field, I mean in law, with respect to chemical weapons, but I'm qualified to, because I've gone through all of the chemical weapons training, I'm qualified to go into a chemically contaminated environment and work with the teams. So that's the qualified part of being the expert. So some people think it means that I know what all the chemical equations are. I have no clue. I do know the law.
Yes, yes. And what's your involvement with the United Nations? So you've spoken about that in class before?
Yes, I work with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, where I'm a senior consultant. And I work in generally these days in West Africa.
Okay.
And I've been working in developing both the legislation and the legislative and judicial capacity to deal with maritime crime. So instances of piracy, drug trafficking, human trafficking, those types of activities. We're working with those governments to try to curtail those activities and to develop the capacity to deal with them domestically.
Excited.
Yeah.
Now, I have a lot of friends and also know a lot of students who are interested in your area of expertise, but also more broadly, public international law.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for students here at the ANU who want to pursue careers in that field?
Pursuing careers in that field, there's just so much stuff to do. And the best bet is, from my perspective, to talk to one of your professors who is engaged in public international law. Because we do have a number of contacts throughout the world that can help us to find positions for the students. For example, I've got some colleagues in UNRWA who will gladly accept students to come and work as interns. We have, we have the connections, and we've done the networking throughout the world, so a lot of us know where the opportunities are and who to contact in order to engage in those opportunities. But there is an endless list of opportunities. There's so many organizations that need volunteer help, some that are willing to pay, which is a big thing for the students, and the internships that are essentially stepping blocks into a broader career in public international law.
Yeah, which is great advice because I know a lot of friends who are interested in this area.
Yeah.
And I know also you inspired myself and my friends to participate in the International Humanitarian Law Movement last year.
Right.
So
Yes, yeah, I remember
think
that.
that's also a great idea.
I remember the shock.
Yes, as our judge. So I just kind of wanted to ask also about the most challenging experience, because you have quite a diverse history in regards to law and the various organisations that you work with. What has been the most challenging experience for you to date?
Challenging experience in what way?
As a lawyer, so have you ever been faced with a particular challenge or area that you're working in?
Actually, the one that I find most challenging is the issue that inspired me to do my PhD, and that is the issue of starvation during maritime blockade and other types of maritime interdiction missions. So, it's probably not well known, well, I know that it's not well known that during the First World War, for example, there were more Germans who died of starvation during the First World War than died in the strategic bombing campaign in the Second World War. And they died because of the blockade. We don't hear about that. We see the pictures of devastated cities, but we don't see the underlying issues that occur, the humanitarian problems that occur during something like that. And then we move forward to the Iraq, the sanctions against Iraq, and the horrible effect that they had on the civilian population of Iraq. And that's the area that I plan to spend a lot of time working on for the next couple of years.
Just doing that. Now, there are a lot of contemporary issues that we're facing at the moment in regards to public international law. You've got new actors, new perspectives, new conflicts every day.
Right.
What would you say are some of the most important or troubling issues that we're facing at the moment internationally? Because there are so many.
There are so many,
Yeah.
but the apparent lack of respect amongst some governments for the concepts and principles of international law. The flagrant abuses that are going on with respect to humanitarian law in a place like Syria, for example, and the protection that is being given to people who are engaging in such horrible acts. They're under the umbrella of one of the powers in many cases, and when we see that disrespect for international law, it means that we're in a bit of a bad place. Having said that, I do believe in the international system, and I think that as long as right-minded countries persevere and follow the law, that we can correct what has been going on for the last little while. I have faith in that.
Absolutely. Now, as a Canadian,
Yes.
who do we go for in regards to ice hockey? Who do we support?
This year it looks like the money might be on the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Okay.
I don't like Toronto. I would prefer it be Ottawa or Montreal, but
Okay.
I'll go with Toronto for this year.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure speaking to you. And thank you to everyone for watching. Stay tuned for next week's Ask an Academic.